Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to solve Leet codes database problem, which is 550 gameplay analysis. Question is, write a solution to report the fraction of player that logged in again on the day after the day they first log in, rounded to 2 decimal places. In other words, you need to count the number of players that logged in for at least 2 consecutive days starting from their first login date. Then divide that number by total number of the players. The result format is in the following example. We have a table activity where we have player ID, device ID, event date, games played. Only the player with ID 1 logged back in after the first day he had logged in. So the answer is 1 by 3, that is 0.33. Okay, what we have to do is we have to find out the players who logged in 2 consecutive days. For example, here the first number logged in on day 1 and day 2 as well, and others didn't, so next day they didn't log in. So let's move to the approach part. First is get the minimum event date for each player to get first login date. We have to find out first login date to identify what is the next consecutive, so that is the next day. So what we can do is we can just get minimum. Now once we get minimum, what we can do is inner join activity table on player ID and event date is equal to first login date plus 1. So we can join player date, player ID on player ID and event date, which is going to be your this date, equal to minimum of event date, that is first date plus 1. So when you do that, then you will get this row because it is minimum date plus 1. Once you get minimum date plus 1, what we can do is get count of such IDs, these like 1, and convert to float because we need it in decimal places, and divide it by total, and finally we have to round it to 2. Okay, let's move to the query part. Let me do one thing. I'm just writing step by step. So let's get to the first point. What we can do is get minimum event date for each player. So select player ID, then minimum of event date from activity table. Once we get that, let me rename it as first login date. Now this is the first point. Let me just quickly run it. What we get, we missed group by part, group by player ID. Okay, now we have 3 players and their minimum login date, that is the first login date. Okay, fine. Now we move to the second point. Inner join activity table on player ID and event date equal to first login date. Let me do one thing. Select star from activity, which is this. I believe I copied it. No. So this table and join our this query, give alias at q as q on what. So q dot player id is equal to a dot player id. Now we got join kind of scenario, and we have to move to the second part, that is what, first login date equal to plus 1, event date equal to first login date plus 1. So and event date is equal to first login. Now to add date, we have function date add, which will take your first argument as dd, what we have to add, that is in what format, it is in date, so dd and 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just player id, we don't need anything else. In ambiguous column player id, where it is here, let me now once we got it, we know that we got player 1, which is correct one, this one player 1 only logged in back. So now let me just convert it to float. So float, cast as float, and once we convert it to float, we have to divide it by total. So select count of distinct player id from activity. Once we do that, what we have to do is we have to rename it as fraction. So let me rename it as fraction, and at the end we have to round it to 2. So I am using round function to round it to 2. Let me run it. Let's see if we have any failure or errors. Okay, we don't have any error, everything is looking fine. Let me submit it if it works. And one of our test cases failed. Expected is 1, whereas we got okay. So the issue is we cannot directly, because as we got 1 only here, so that's why we were able to get the result. But when we have more than 1, we cannot do this kind of things. So how to handle this scenario? To handle this, we can remove this part from here and wrap entire query in about thing. One bracket, let me rename it as q1, and select, let me paste the same thing here. And what else we need? And here, instead of doing this, we need to do count of player ID as players. And here, okay, let me do step by step, so will not mess up anything. Now I'm going to run it. What we got is player, that is 1. Once we have count, I'm going to do select players divided by our entire query, select count of what? Distinct of player ID from activity. And we have to name it as fraction. Now the casting part is still remaining, and even the rounding part, so I am just doing step by step. Okay, something is okay here. Now this query needs to be wrapped in q1, and here we need from. Oops, I missed a bracket also. Okay, now to get a fraction, we have to cast it to float. Now if we run it, let's see what we get. We're getting it in fraction, but if you see, we have more than this what is required. So let me round it up, round to what? To 2 decimal places. Let me run it. Okay, it's accepted. Let me submit it. Hope now it won't cause that kind of issue. And it worked. Great. See you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.